Well, welcome everyone as you're coming in. My name is Janaea. I use pronouns she, they, and I'm a member of Therapists for Palestine. So I'll kind of kick us off as folks trickle in. Um, so this is our first ever Therapy is Political speaker series. So this is huge. Therapists for Palestine, some of you may know, is a grassroots organization committed to a free Palestine and all liberatory movements extending from Turtle Island across the globe. Therapists for Palestine as an organization, we have a two-pronged mandate. So first, we work with our professional organizations to pass solidarity statements and or BDS motions and to include anti-Palestinian racism under their DEI initiatives. Secondly, we institute change and take action in our fields and work sites to protect, support, and encourage politicized therapists who take pro-Palestinian stances. Welcome everyone to this series. In this series, we aim to highlight, raise awareness, discuss, and empower audiences towards an anti-colonial approach within the mental health field, while strongly maintaining Palestine at the center of our conversations and movement. Along the way, we hope to connect anti-colonial mental health workers to one another and to deepen our sense of responsibility toward Palestine as therapists. We also hope to introduce seekers of psychotherapy services, which may also be therapists, to the liberatory possibilities inherent in anti-colonial therapy. Ultimately, this series is created with the liberation of Palestine and of all colonized people in mind. So thank you all for being here today. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Doro for our land acknowledgement.
Thank you for that, Janaea. So just wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement before we start. As Therapists for Palestine, we support Indigenous sovereignty on Turtle Island, including across the territory now called Ontario. So we're now speaking to the land Ottawa, where our speaker is based for today. This is unceded, never surrendered, occupied territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. We cannot talk about Canada's aiding and arming of the genocide in Palestine without also talking about Canada's militarized theft of Indigenous land here. So when we go on the streets and we chant from the belly of the beast, hands off the Middle East, we mean it. We mean that we're in the heart of empire, even if our country's leaders claim to be distancing themselves from the empire just down south. Canada supplies the weapons for the genocide in Gaza, the over-policing of land defenders here, and weaponized vehicles in the gunning down of Minneapolis protesters right now. And because we're in the heart of empire, it is our voices, our dissent, our boycotting, and our organizing that will bring the empire down. So I encourage all of our folks here who are gathered here today to think about maybe one or two actions that they can take materially and concretely that will support Indigenous sovereignty, not just in Palestine, but also here in Canada. I'll pass it back to Janaea.
Thanks so much, Doro. So as folks are finally coming in, we're also wanting to talk a little bit about where our funds are going. So your donations upon registering, obviously make this event possible today. And they ensure equitable compensation for our speaker. All remaining proceeds are being donated to direct mutual aid campaigns to support families in Gaza and Egypt via Grassroots Gaza. You can learn more about Grassroots Gaza and donate through their Instagram at grassroots_Gaza. So as we have everyone here welcoming into the Zoom, I'll just go over a few housekeeping things really quickly to ensure that this series runs smoothly today. So the event will be recorded, so please just keep this in mind for your own comfort and confidentiality needs as you engage. Please keep yourself muted throughout. The chat box is open, so feel free to, if you'd like, introduce yourself with your name, pronouns, profession, location, if you're comfortable. Feel free to share reflections throughout. That's part of why we're doing this, is to connect with one another. Know that there are moderators present to watch and manage any harm. So anyone who enacts behaviors in any way that are harmful will be immediately removed from the Zoom meeting. If
Excuse
time
me,
permits,
the chat is disabled. I can only speak.
okay, thank you so much for letting us know. Our tech support will look into that. And so as we go tonight too, if time permits toward the end of our evening, we'll open up our discussion verbally just through the chat, through a live Q&A. And at that time, you can write your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to address them. But we've had lots of questions coming in from folks as they've registered that we want to take the time to honor too. And I'll pass it back to Doro.
So we were hoping before we start today's speaker series, just for everyone to take a minute, check in, slow down, come into the space. I'm sure everyone's coming from all over the place, probably had a long day coming from work, maybe witnessing a lot of stuff on social media, reading the news, engaging, organizing. So this is maybe a touchstone to maybe take 30 seconds that we need, whether that's to take a couple deep breaths, whether that's to drink some water, shake something out for your arms and legs, and come back, return, taking stock of what's going through your mind. We'll just take maybe 10 seconds for folks to tune back in and breathe and ground. Yeah, okay. Well, welcome back. We'll introduce our speaker for today. We are so honored to have Maria with us today. Maria is a Palestinian psychotherapist based in Ontario, Canada, also known as Turtle Island. She is a public educator, speaker, and fierce advocate for Palestine through her social media and community engagements. She intertwines her therapeutic practice with anti-oppressive, cross-movement, liberatory, and social justice principles. And you can follow her work on Instagram at mar._unfiltered. So I'll pass along the time to Maria, who will take it away and start us off.
Hi, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? My sound is still working. Awesome. It is such a joy and an honor to be here with you all today. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for your curiosity. And I'm so excited to see what this conversation can bring out of us both this evening and then going forward into how we practice psychotherapy and how we show up in community. What a really exciting time in our field. And it's such an honor to be starting off this series, the speaker series. So my understanding of this evening is that folks have submitted questions. And so what we might do is I think Dora's gonna hit me with the questions that have been asked, and then I think that will kind of shape the talk that I'm gonna give this evening.
Sorry for the delay, just had to turn my video back on. So we received a number of great questions when people signed up on their Eventbrite. And we grouped them into several categories, going from the systemic to the personal. If it's okay with you, Maria, we'll start maybe from the broad and then go to the more narrow.
Yeah, let's do it.
The first question that we received, this is more about liberation and decolonial therapy. This was, what does a liberation-oriented approach to therapy mean to you today?
Such a good question, such a broad question. When I was looking over this question in particular before this evening, the first thing that came to mind for me is, what are the stereotypes that other practitioners who are either averse or just new to this kind of a topic, what might the reaction be when we talk about politicizing therapy? And I think a big misconception that maybe people have is this idea that we are going to impose something on the client, that we're going to make therapy about our politics or our political agenda or something of that nature. But it's very much the opposite in the sense of a liberatory approach to therapy is actually about honoring the agency of the client and the sovereignty of the client. And I actually think that in many ways, therapy is already political for therapists in general, and they just don't know it. So, a kind of classic example that I think about is, let's say something as ubiquitous as, let's say, body image, right? Let's say we're working with a client through body image. You don't have to go too far to get to the point where you're talking about society, you're talking about politics, you're talking about who benefits from you disliking your body. Who are the powers that be that are invested in your insecurity and in your, lack of, I don't know, pride and comfort in, this body that you inhabit. And so really what liberatory therapy and how it works for me, no matter who the client is sitting in front of me, whether that client is politically active or not, it's really about helping that client situate themselves in the world, right? And to say, okay, especially right now, I think a lot of our clients are feeling the economic strain of this moment, and the impact of austerity measures. I know where I live and where I practice, we're here in the so-called capital of Canada, right? And so we have government workers who are being laid off right now by the thousands, right? And so it's helping, let's say that client, for example, it's about helping them be like, okay, you are here, and then you're also here within this wider system. And helping a client name the system that is impacting them can help bring back a sense of agency, because now we've gone outside the lens of the individual. What am I doing wrong? To, okay, what are the forces that are shaping this moment, historically, politically, environmentally, that are leading you to this point? And once a client can kind of understand that wider context of the situation that they're in and the struggles that they're facing, then they can make decisions from that place of agency and decisions from that place of, okay, I am a dot, in this broader matrix, and I actually get to decide how I'm going to respond to my environment. And so that's really one of the big benefits of allowing our practices to be political, is actually giving our clients the courage to say, okay, these systems impact me, and how do I want to respond to that?
Thank you for that. So
Yeah,
indeed, it's a lot about naming the system, the forces, and the power that shapes our decisions and our lives, and maybe giving back clients the choice and the courage to choose whatever their actions might be.
absolutely.
I'm curious if you might want to deepen that a little bit and let us know if you have thoughts on what sorts of particular questions or invitations you might typically offer a client when you're trying to explore that power or the system or the forces that are shaping things. Would you be able to share a little bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think a huge component of this, and one of the big, I guess, departures from the way that many of us were taught how to do therapy in the Western system, is moving the client away from this individualism and this competitiveness that says, you have to succeed to, and once you succeed, then you'll be mentally well. Um, Versus allowing a client to define their own idea of healing, and a healing that is not dependent on these external forces. Um, so one of the things that I really like to invite clients to do and explore with clients is helping them actually look inwards and say, let's say somebody has a job that they initially got into because they really like the work, right? And they really liked activating that part of their skill set. But then you have this system that is, making it so that that job is, being cut or less, isn't paying enough to finance their lives, and actually helping a client reconnect with, like, who is that person Where is that younger version of you that first had interest in this form of creativity, in this form of self-expression, and helping them really wake up to who they are again? Right? We have in this society in this is so invested in us being disconnected from ourselves, right? We live in a society that wants us to produce, and sees us often as products and as parts in this machine, and we got to keep going, and it's business as usual. And so for me, helping a client to reconnect with who are you as a person? Who did you wish that you could be, 10 years ago when you got into the work that you were doing? Who was that child, that creative child before the burdens of life, came down on you and taught you that you shouldn't be this way or shouldn't be that way? It's funny because as I say it now, I'm listening to myself and I'm like, that's not so different from the therapy that I've always been doing. The difference is that I like to invite clients to radically accept those parts of themselves that this society says are not okay and embrace them and find enough curiosity and hope in the world to say, you know what, there's probably other people like me out there. And to find the courage to connect with those people and to start maybe building towards environments and spaces where they can be celebrated and they can work together with people to do things in the world that feel genuinely meaningful in a society, in a time in history where meaning feels so lacking so much of the time.
I love that twist on the classic question of looking inwards and interrogating your younger self, because this one actually looks at what were you before um, capitalism set in, before all the isms set in, before all the disconnection started happening, and that it might actually be possible if we embrace the communities and the possibilities that offer that to us. So I love that.
Yeah. Mm.
We talked a little bit about how liberation and principles of untangling that might exist within the therapy room. I'm curious, as therapists, are there actions that liberation-oriented therapists should be taking outside of the therapy space, whether that's individually or collectively, according to you?
Yeah. I think we are really at a moment in history in general, but also in this field, where we have to take a real look at, are we serious? Do we take ourselves seriously as healthcare providers? I find in psych fields, we have a lot of us, I'm sure many can relate to this. There's almost like this inferiority complex sometimes with, therapy work and social work and the psychological aspect where we're like, oh, but we're not medical doctors, right? And it's like, well, no, do we really believe that what we do is important? And if we do believe that what we do is important, then let's rise to that. Let's rise to it. So we're saying psychological health is important. Okay. Do we mean what we're saying? I think back to the early days of COVID, and as we know, COVID is still with us, as our disabled comrades are constantly reminding us. In the early days, when many of us, at least, here in the West, I mean, maybe I'm, giving away my age or what have you, but we'd never experienced something like that before, where we're having medical counselors are getting up on the news to tell us there is this illness that is circulating rapidly, right? And that's because those people take their profession seriously. They're saying there is a risk to public health and we need to inform people. And so now we're here living in this time, and as a Palestinian in the early days of genocide of 2023, right? I'm like, oh, okay, this thing is happening that is going to have a massive impact on my community. And as time went on, we saw it had a massive impact on many communities and many colonized people, indigenous people, Black people who see in the Palestinians their own history. And so if we as psychological health professionals are going to say, yeah, we believe in what we do, we believe in psychological health as a metric of well-being, we have a duty to stand up and be public and say, yes, things are occurring that are leading people to suffering, to mental suffering, right? And we shouldn't be ashamed to be getting up there and saying things like that and actually owning that. if we are serious about what we do. And so I think a lot of us were taught to do therapy in this environment that was very much like the therapy room is very private, and you as a therapist must be a very private person. And this idea that a therapist can't be known by their clients or can't be seen in public, almost like therapy is like this like confessional or something where it's very secretive, which I find kind of funny because on the one hand, we have therapists who are talking about it's okay, mental health, there shouldn't be a stigma, you know, it's okay to struggle and to go to therapy. But then on the other hand, we're saying therapists should be very quiet and keep, you know, their personhood almost in the closet, right? And so I was trained and socialized very much that you need to be a blank slate in front of the world. And first of all, we know that this is actually very I can't find the better wording for this right now, but it's very like metropolis centered in the sense that, okay, I'm being trained in the context of I live in a big city. So something like that is possible, theoretically, for me to be a private individual that nobody knows outside the therapy office. But in small communities, in rural communities, we know that therapists are part of the community, right? That a therapist is not just this professional that you see secretly, you know, in the room and nobody knows about it, but this person's also your neighbor, right? This person is also bringing their kids to soccer practice. That therapists get to be a full human being, and we have that right. And so what we are doing by saying therapy is political is not just a matter of, you know, the therapist is going to go and make big political speeches, but actually the therapist is a member of their community. We are members of our community. And as such, we have responsibilities to actually show up and be in community and be in the streets and be on the front lines of these fights for justice that are actively, daily impacting people's mental health. And so we really need to be continuing to shatter this like fake idea that a therapist is a private being only, because we're not. And we know that we're not. And we need to get more comfortable with, yeah, the reality that we're full human beings and not be so scared of dual relationships. I think that's something else that a lot of us were trained into, that, you know, having a dual relationship with a client is very taboo and scary, but it's like, that's just not real life. It's just not real life. When I, as a Palestinian, I'm seeing my people get slaughtered, right? And then I might have clients who are Palestinians who are seeing our people get slaughtered. We might be client and therapist in the room, but in the world outside that therapy session, we're Palestinians. And that divide is less important. So we need to kind of get more confident as therapists with holding that. That if my client sees me in the world fighting for justice, like, one, I think that's something to be very proud of. But two, if that does bring something up for my client, that they see me somewhere fighting for a cause, let me be confident enough that my client feels comfortable bringing that to me and saying, hey, I saw you fighting for this. I saw you at such and such an event. It made me feel weird. I thought it was strange that you were there. Are we confident enough as therapists that if our client brings that to us, that we can say, yeah, you saw me there and I saw you too. How did that feel for you to see me there? What did it bring up? We have to be confident enough to navigate what that means. And there's a growth point there.
Absolutely. I think the imagery of the therapy being this private confessional thing is really powerful, because if we claim for therapy and mental health to be a real profession and for us to wield real power in the way that our clients' well-being influences the community and vice versa, and is happening within this global context of genocide and harm that is being enacted all around the world, we have to put our work where our money is and be in community with other people and be not afraid to have those tough conversations, like you said, dual relationships, be okay with talking about those things, because much as our clients are not floating around in the void of their own thoughts and feelings, neither are we. So there's that, like you said, there's a growth point there for sure.
Yeah.
So we're seeing more and more people trickle in, and people are dropping their names and their professions and in the chat. So that's really nice to see. And it sounds like,
Awesome.
yeah, it looks like we have a wide breadth of people working in different sectors and jobs and communities coming in. And I'm thinking if we want to maybe switch gears a little bit and talk about workplace and systems. A lot of us
Sure.
ourselves working in systems and workplaces that aren't necessarily friendly and maybe acting in very colonial ways. And that was a very popular type of question that we did get in terms of navigating that. So I'm curious, based on whether that was your personal experience or just theoretically, how can regulated providers like mental health professionals navigate through reform within the colonial confines of their colleges, their regulatory bodies and boards? How would you suggest that people try to navigate that?
Yeah, what a massive question. So I almost can't help but say this, but today is actually the 2-year anniversary of the day I was fired and terminated from a group practice. That was very much that kind of environment where it was very taboo to speak about Palestine. It was taboo to have any kind of political presence in general, although Palestine is often that breaking point where you find out what is your workplace ready to accept about you. And for a really long time, I struggled with this. I was like, do I even want to be part of a system that, one, we have to be really honest about the history of the field of psychology in the context in which we live. So this is not true in other places, right? I like to talk about psychologies, right? Often in the West, we say psychology, and it's actually, well, there are different psychologies, right? If you go to the global South and you speak to mental health practitioners there, they have a very different history in this field than we might, right? Especially if you go to Latin America and you look at the liberation psychology that they've been doing over there for decades. Versus here in the West, we're living on stolen land. We're living in settler colonies, at least here in Canada and, our neighbors to the south. So I wrestled with this. Can I really be at peace with myself, being a practitioner in these systems that historically have often been used to oppress marginalized people and further marginalize people? So that was the first question that I had to wrestle with. Am I even okay with this? It felt like, at times, it felt like crawling out of my own skin. Like, do I really want to have this license, right, that is given to me by the state? Really? And that's real. We have to contend with what that means. So for one of the classic and most common examples, I think, of something we discuss is something like mandated reporting and the power that we have the option to yield as, registered mental health professionals, where we can actually, we shouldn't. And I do, we were told, for example, in grad school, I was trained that I have to tell my client in the first session that if they report suicidal thoughts to me, then I might have to call the police. Right. And that's wild, right? That this idea that the first session I should have with my client is one in which I invoke the police. Right. And so this is the context that we're coming into when we talk about these fields. Is a lot of times state repression and state violence has almost been baked into them from the jump. So this is the first thing to reckon with. And what I came to in the end, maybe not the end, but at least for now, is the reality that as a liberation-oriented practitioner, I can't just leave this field. I can't just drop this license because my people are in this system. Right? We've got kids and teens and youth who are going to schools where psychologists are called and psychologists are present. Right? So it's for us to just walk away from this system, it doesn't quite work because we have a responsibility to the harm that is currently being perpetuated by these systems. Right? And so as much as reform is not the end all be all of any struggle, it is still an important conversation to have in our fields. And so how do we navigate work contexts where this isn't an acceptable conversation to have? We have to start. That's the first thing we have to start. So 2 years ago, when I was terminated, I was telling some of my colleagues before everybody joined that like I felt so alone professionally, so alone. And I knew intellectually, I'm like, no, there's other people who are dealing with this. And I can see them in the distance on social media that other people understand what I'm going through. But on a local level, on a regional level, I felt so alone. And now I look 2 years later at this. Look at this meeting that we're having. It's incredible. Therapists for Palestine didn't, I mean, unless there was a tiny pocket of therapists I don't know about, but it didn't exist 2 years ago, right? And that happened because we connected and because we got serious. So the first thing is connection. We have to connect with colleagues who get it, one, but two, we need to connect with people who are in our situation, who are, under the same regulatory boards as us, right? Who are up against the same institutions that we are. And so I was learning a lot in terms of the philosophy of therapy and of liberatory practice from people who were living in all corners of the world, right? Practitioners everywhere. But in terms of how do I fight my own licensing board, the one that won't acknowledge the genocide to this day, by the way, right? The only way to do that is to work together with people who already get it. And so if you're working in a space that isn't affirming of your values, sometimes it's difficult to leave those spaces for whatever reason. Maybe, you have some kind of health situation. Maybe you're like an expectant parent. There's so many reasons why we might have to be in a space for the time being that isn't working the way that we think therapy should work, but it is something to start planning. Now I'm with a group practice that is affirming BB therapy, and they're actually about it. And they brought me in because they like what I do, they respect what I do, and they want to collaborate. So know that you're not alone. Whatever the situation is, you're never alone in that. Look at how many people are we? 117 people. And that's just a sample of the people who want to be having these conversations. I think it's also important to note that you might feel really alone in the clinic or in the space that you're in, but there's always somebody else that feels that way. And you might be, and you might have to be that first brave person that's going to say something. And sometimes it's difficult to go straight to whatever the powers that be in your situation and say, we need to say free Palestine as a clinic. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I think we should be better than this, but sometimes that's a really big step to be asking an institution to do. So what can you do? You turn to your colleague that you can tell, that is bothered, and say, isn't this so wrong? Can't we do something differently? And you start to connect and build real solidarity with just the people around you. And, get to work. We have, as Janaea said at the top of the hour, right, we have concrete goals with Therapists for Palestine. We want to see our regulatory boards acknowledge racial trauma, acknowledge systems of oppression that affect our clients. I think what's also has been huge for me, I cannot state this enough, that as a Palestinian in this field, I am not the first person to fight these battles. I learned and continue to learn so much from Black therapists and from Indigenous therapists who have had to fight these battles before me for their communities. And I've learned so much from therapists who talk about, Black therapists who talk about what it was like to deal with these systems in 2020 when BLM was really, at a height, and hopefully not the last height by any means. I struggle to kind of make that like a singularity or something, but I learned from that, right? So we are not alone in any of our battles. There are always people who came before us that we can turn to and say, how did you do this? How did you, as a Black therapist, go to bat with your regulatory body that says that you need to call the police on your client? Right? And so learn from the people who've come before you and the battles that have been fought before you, because there is a precedent and we can build on it together.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I love how you first painted like the dual landscapes of first when you start reckoning with how state violence has been built into our regulatory colleges and our ethics and things like that, that it's incompatible with the way that we want to do liberatory therapy. But at the same time, there are people wanting help and you want to leave your people behind. So what do? We connect with the other people that we also care, who also care about this. And I also love that you touched on for folks who might be working in a workplace or situation that doesn't necessarily affirm at the moment. In addition to finding places that may be more affirming, is the fact that you might have to be the first brave person to say something, and being maybe the start of some organizing to do of mobilizing some of the maybe quieter folks around you who are also disgruntled about things. And if that isn't even available, turning to your elders, turning to people who came before you, turning to history. How was this done in the past as well, for a little hope in that sense. And the theme of hope comes back time and time again in these questions as well. There's a lot of grappling of hope that we're seeing with folks who are coming to here and asking questions and things like that. So I think it's a big topic. And I wonder if you can speak to, for therapists who are regularly grappling with their own sense of hope or hopelessness or varying in between, when hope feels barely existent or present anymore, how does one know when you've reached a limit of no longer being able to see clients, for example, if you're a service provider? Or is it more about pushing through despite it all? If you have a sense of what that balance looks like for you, we would love to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, one, I want to acknowledge that this is a very personal and not personal to me necessarily, but personal to each of us, right? I can tell you about my limits and the moment that I know that no, I need to take a break, but I can't tell you about yours, right? So there's a level of needing to be aware of yourself and of what is that line for you. And I was reflecting earlier today with a colleague about how do you know, right? Especially when the world is so heavy. And when we're when we're talking to me as a Palestinian, I'm talking about 2 years of watching a massacre on my cell phone, putting it down, taking a deep breath, and then 5 minutes later, I'm opening the door to my office. And how was your week? Right? And so on the baseline, should I have to work, if we're talking about therapy as a job, should I have to work in those conditions? No. And that made me very angry for a really long time, a really long time. And I'm only recently coming, I don't know, to terms. I haven't decided on how I would label like where I'm at right now, but it's definitely something you have to reckon with. And so I think it's a very personal question in the sense of you have to know your cues, right? So like a very kind of basic cue for me is, am I able to be present? To really be present with somebody. Close colleagues of mine will know that in the beginning of the genocide, this was all very it's extraordinarily shocking to learn how to be a therapist in those conditions of the massacre on the cell phone. And I had a post-it note that I would put, next to my therapy chair, and it was angled in such a way that my clients wouldn't see it, but it said practice presence. And where I define presence as this person, my client sitting in front of me for these 50 minutes is the most interesting person in this world. And this is like a book that I'm reading. I'm going to get lost in the novel of this person's life. And that's kind of how I define presence. And I actually went back to something that I read in grad school, which was Irving Yalom, who was on my, where is that man? Anyway, I don't know if people are fans of Yalom, but he had a line where he said he was writing to the newer therapist, and he said something to the effect of, just get through the hour. Just get through the hour. If you as a new therapist are feeling insecure and you don't know what you're doing, all you have to do is get through the hour. And I had to learn to define good therapy a bit differently than I used to, in the sense of I came up in a really academic space. I originally wanted to go get a PhD. Thank God I did not do that. I would literally still be studying and like losing my mind, more so than I have already in these 2 years. But I used to define good therapy as something very technical and treatment plans. And not that those things aren't important, but sometimes when you're really at your wit's end, don't underestimate the power of just being present with your client. That's huge. It's huge to just be present. And I think because we are therapists, we know how complex therapy can be. We know how complex the issues are that people can bring to us. And I think that a lot of us I'm someone who just, maybe it's like the eldest daughter in me, I don't know what it is, but high standards. But for so many of our clients, just the fact that they have this hour to release and to be heard and unconditionally, get that unconditional positive regard is already such a gift for people in a world that is so hostile. And so, like, allow yourself to be the good enough therapist, right? The same way we talk about like the good enough parent, and that's okay. So that's the personal piece, or rather the kind of like in the moment piece. I also think that there is something to be said for kind of like this like philosophical work that we each have to do, where when we are looking at multiple genocides, we're looking at the escalation of ICE, which we know that ICE has always been attacking Black and brown communities, when we're looking at, just so much oppression, it's really difficult to reckon with that. The fact that I alone cannot solve these problems, and that nothing that any one of us does on our own is enough. There's a deep struggle that I think many of us relate to with that. And it's like an existential crisis in the brain. Like, I should do more, I should do more. And it's like, okay, that's coming from an individualistic mindset that we're taught in the West, where I have to be the hero of all these situations. No, this is a we, right? And each of us has a role to play. And so when I talk about a philosophical inquiry into yourself, you have to kind of sit down and say, okay, if I'm being realistic with myself, what is my role in this? What is my role in all of this? I have this joke with people that, like, thank God I'm not an organizer, because I can't. I cannot organize myself to do things. But there are people who are really organized, and they do the meeting minutes, and they do the things that I can't do. And I'm doing things that other people can't do. And so when it comes to our therapy work, maybe we can all like look at ourselves and say, okay, where does my work as a therapist fit into this broader picture of liberation? Because this is a role, right? Again, it comes back to that like professional self-esteem of like, do we believe in what we do? Because the nurses on the front lines, and rest in peace to Alex Preddy, the nurses on the front lines, they're not out here being like, do I do enough? They're just like, okay, who's the next person? What's the next wound? So what we do is important, and it's already part of the revolution. It's already part of making this world a better place. And so respect that. Respect that you do that. And take inventory with yourself. What is my role in this fight? What resources do I have? What can I give? What do I need? Be real. And then act from that place of intention.
Thank you for sharing both the personal piece and the philosophical piece. Even just the post-it notes, that just getting through the hour, the slowing down. I'm sure a lot of us will be grateful to hear that. Okay, these are tips and tricks that I can, get through the hour and be the good enough therapist. But also very grateful to hear about the philosophical piece as well. The question of what is my role as a therapist, and how does it fit into the broader picture of liberation? And I'm sure that's a question that a lot of us will be mulling over in chunks, one chunk at a time. So we did, in the topic of navigating colonial systems, we did receive questions from not just therapists, but maybe people looking for therapists as well. So a question that we had was, how does one start finding therapists with anti-Zionist or anti-American imperialist values? How does one start embarking on that search of the good fit that way? I'm wondering if you have some insight on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there has been a lot of really cool work that has been done in these 2 years. I remember 2 years ago, I saw a post for the first time. I'd never seen anything of this nature, being like, here is how you, as a therapist, can signal to people that you are safe to talk about the genocide in Palestine. And it said things like wear a kufiya or have, something in your office, have something on your website. I see a lot of therapists now who have the watermelon, right? These like small signals of safety. And I also want people to know that none of that is new. In the sense that when I was in my master's, I did my honors thesis or whatever it was called, major paper, whatever. I did it on queer affirming therapy. How can I communicate to LGBTQ plus people that they are safe to come and speak to me? And I am gay, but I don't necessarily, give that off immediately. But this is a safe space. I hope I strive to be a safe space. So I was really interested in that topic, and all the research on, working with queer people in therapy tells you that people feel a lot safer when there is something on the website that shows that I am in solidarity with this community. And that, queer clients, for example, are far more likely to book with a therapist who has some kind of indication of safety for their community on their website. So the cool thing is I think more and more therapists are doing that and are not afraid to do that, which is great. And so however you as a therapist can signal safety to people, I think is huge. I have pride, not, you can't see it from this angle, but I do have two small a pride flag, a trans flag. My bookshelf is full of Malcolm X and all kinds of things. There are signals in my office that tell people that I'm striving. I'll never say that I'm an entirely safe space for any community, even my own, right? Because we're all growing. But I try to give that off. So for clients who are looking for a safe provider, know that there are so many therapists out there who are actually intentionally setting up those, signposts to tell you I'm striving to be in solidarity with your community. And then also, having been a therapist within a work structure that didn't allow me to be open about those things, sometimes you might be, let's say you're referred to a clinic and you're matched with somebody who I often get clients who will book with me and they say, I chose you because your last name sounds Arabic. I'm like, yes, correct. But, sometimes that's all they're going off of. And so, it's unfortunate. I hope that we can get better at this so that clients can actually understand who they're getting into a conversation with from the jump. But I want clients or people who are seeking therapy to know that you have a right to ask your therapist or this person that you're interviewing to be your therapist, to ask them these tough questions. How do you help clients navigate the impact of systemic oppression? How do you, as a therapist, challenge yourself to unlearn systemic forms of harm? What are you doing to further your education around anti-racism? I want to really encourage, this is a time for clients to know that you're not at the mercy of any therapist, right? You are somebody who's seeking out a service, and you have a right to ask that potential service provider the tough questions about whether they meet your needs, right? No therapist is the expert on your life, right? You're coming together with a therapist to collaborate together on therapy that's going to fit your needs. And so don't be afraid to ask those questions. Maybe that's something that we can put out as Therapists for Palestine, like a list of questions to ask therapists or something like that. But yeah, transparency is huge, and I support it.
I think that's great. I don't see why not. And even based on the questions that you just listed out, I think that's a great starting point for some sort of guide or resource.
Yeah.
Questions that for clients can ask their therapist when they're kind of just starting out and sussing out the vibe. So I'm hearing that there are ways that therapists signal safety in a way that it's not, oh, I'm 100% always going to be safe for you, but I'm trying my best to signal be in solidarity with you. And also recognizing that every client has a right to know if your therapist is trying to be safe. And you don't have to always have to guess through last names or decor and things like that. You can ask as well. So I think the affirmation that those questions might be useful for us to contemplate in the future. So we're at the point now that we could choose to pivot a little bit more, even more inwards and more personal with your life and how it's brought you this far. I did want to check in with you first, Maria. How are you doing? Do you need water? Do you need?
I am good. I'm thriving. I'm happy to be here.
Great, awesome, cool. And I just wanted to also reflect that I'm seeing lots of great comments in the chat, lots of sharing about personal experience, some questions, some reflecting on each other. And I'm looking at a time as well. We might have some time for a live Q&A after these personal questions. We'll see as we go, but folks can consider if they have some questions they might want to ask. And if we do have time, we can ask folks to paste that into the chat and we'll go from there. So if you're okay with pivoting a little bit more personally, Maria.
Yeah, let's do it.
We did want to start off with a question about emotions as a Palestinian therapist. Since the escalation of the genocide, we've received a question from a fellow Palestinian therapist who has been processing emotions such as shame, grief, rage, and survivor's guilt, which, according to them, feels also like an internal decolonization process at times to continue holding this deep love for their people and their land. And you've spoken to some of this publicly, particularly the shame part. Can you share more about how you've been processing since the escalation of this phase of the genocide and holding all these emotions?
Yeah. Oof. Right. Even the question is so real. And it's funny because I never intended to be any kind of public figure. If people are like familiar with my Instagram world, that none of that was ever my intention. I think that I just started talking and people were drawn to hear what I was saying. But I don't know what the perception is that people have, but I don't think that I share even a fraction of the inner turmoil of these 2 years, the anger, the rage, the guilt, deep survivor's guilt, which I had hoped in the early days that I was like above that somehow, like I'm like, oh, I'm a therapist and I know how to deal with things, but no, like survivor's guilt is rough. And I've really had to deeply, deeply reckon with it and with the shame too. On an intellectual level, I can look around at my life and say like I didn't choose to be born in diaspora, right? It's not an individual failing of mine that my siblings in Gaza are living in tents that are soaking wet under the weight of winter. And I'm comfortable under these blankets. Like, I think that if I'm not careful, I can spiral very easily. And anything and everything can become a trigger for survivor's guilt. Purely on the basis that because Gaza has been stripped of everything, suddenly the everything that I have, whether it's warmth, whether it's a glass of water, whatever it is, can be a trigger for survivor's guilt. And if you take it one step further, it could be a trigger for shame. Right? And this is where that distinction, I guess, comes in of like guilt versus shame, which I think every therapist knows how to like say this statement about how guilt is I did something wrong and shame is I am something wrong. So reckoning with that is very difficult. And I will say that one of the only things, I know that's probably not fair, but I think one of the few things that has helped set me free and I have to bring myself back to is I have had people, like friends that I've made in Gaza, being like, girl, you should take a break. And that really humbles me because I'm like, I'm here thinking like I need to be like the hero, you know, like I need to get shit done. I need to keep going, keep hustling, never be tired, never be, you know. And then I have a friend in Gaza living in like the humble setting of this tent saying like, hey, you're actually working really hard and like it's okay to take a break. And that's like almost revolutionary to me. And it's humbling. And I almost wonder if like the antidote to those feelings of survivor's guilt or that shame is a kind of humility where and I have like an interesting relationship with the word humility, I guess. I think a lot of us have been taught that humility is like humble yourself and you're not, you know, like I don't know. I was raised in a very religious context. Before these times, a lot of what I worked with people was religious trauma and therapy. But my understanding of the word humility now is that, you know, it comes from the word humus, which means earth, right? And so humility to me is about being on the earth. You're not too high and you're not too low. You're grounded and you're realistic. And so being able to accept just your mere humanity and say, like, I actually can't do it all. And I actually am just like a person who struggles and gets tired, and that is okay and that belongs. It doesn't mean that I'm gonna stop. It doesn't mean that I'm giving up. But it means that I'm recognizing that there is an endpoint in my day to how much energy I have, how many resources I have, and that's okay because I'm not alone. Right? And there's somebody else who can, you know, pick up that torch when I need my break. I'm gonna drink some water. There's also a deep, deep acceptance that I'm still wrestling with majorly, where we almost have to exist in two timelines at once, where maybe more than two, I don't know, but there is the urgency of the moment, the urgency of the genocide, where everything is an emergency. Rightly so, yes, it is an emergency. And I can't actually be the person who's going to solve all these emergencies, but I'm going to do my part. And this work that we're doing, the work to free Palestine, the work to free Turtle Island, the work to dismantle empire, is a very long path, right? I'm deeply informed by, you know, the revolutionaries of the past, especially the black revolutionaries in America who said like, hey, this is a long struggle, you know, and look where we were 10 years ago, look where we were 20 years ago, 100 years ago. And the same is true for Indigenous people on these lands. Where, you know, I have family members, you know, and they're Arabs, then a lot of times they came to this country as immigrants, they're happy, they're thankful to be here, and they, you know, they have to kind of learn, you know, like my parents' generation at least, has to learn that like, hey, this is stolen land. And when we talk about missing Palestine and that Palestine was taken from us, we're actually living on land that was taken from the people who are indigenous to this place. And so sometimes I have like elders in my community who'll be like, Bas Maria, you know, like we're never gonna succeed at this. Like they call us, it's done, you know. And I'm like, you know, the indigenous people here have never given up, ever, and they never will. I think we know that as Palestinians. Like we're literally, I'm never gonna give up. It's just never gonna happen. Even on the days where I feel in the depths of my soul that like I'm done, I've done everything I can do. 2 days later, I'll wake up and I'm like, here's the next thing that we're gonna do. And so I think it's about, to come back to this thing about timelines, it's like we have to exist in the moment, hold the grief of the moment, do the resistance task of the day or of the week, while also knowing that we might not see the fruits of our labor today, or tomorrow, or next week, or next month. We might see signs and little victories, but we have to accept that this is a long struggle. And I think when I do that, and I'm able to hold the grief of saying, like, yes, my friend in Gaza could die today. And if that happens, I'm gonna have to hold that and know that that death is not in vain and that we might not see the victory, until decades down the line. But I am capable of existing in both timelines. The timeline where I grieve what's happening today, and the timeline where I have faith that the work that we're doing right now will bear fruit in the future.
Thank you for being so gracious and lending us into this segment of your heart and your inner world, talking us through a bit of how that survivor's guilt might show up and how that interconnects with shame and how that also interconnects with humility, the being grounded and realistic. Again, going back to what is my role here right now and how does it fit into the bigger picture of liberation, finding connection through people that you have, as well as ending with this note about the acceptance of the worlds of urgency and now and doing what needs to be done now, and also the worlds of lineage and history, the rich history of resistance that you come from.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. We've had a couple mentions of October 7 in the comments, folks talking about how they have had revelations of how deeply entrenched some of this bias is in our systems, how their work has changed since October 7th. I'm wondering too, you have mentioned that October 7th was a big moment for you in terms of your political recommitment to Palestine. Would you be able to share more about what this moment meant for you?
Yeah, absolutely. That was such a pivotal moment in my life and my journey, as I think many Palestinians everywhere that we are, I think will agree on this, that the act of resistance that took place that day of people breaking out of a concentration camp also broke me out of whatever I call it, like the Western dissociation. Um, I recently had someone ask me, like, or tell me that they feel super bad that they weren't doing more for Palestine before October 7th of 2023. And I said, I think you're overestimating me as a person. Because if you asked me what was going on my Instagram or on my cell phone on that day, I actually had all the Palestine accounts muted. They were all muted and they were all hidden on Instagram. Because as Palestinians in diaspora, I think, at least for me, I won't speak for all of us, but there have been waves, right? So in 2021, there was an escalation on Gaza, an escalation in the West Bank, and I rose, right? And I spent like 3 weeks being really intense and going to the protests and saying all kinds of things, but I was also in grad school. And at a certain point, I was like, I don't know how to do both of these things. I don't know how to be myself as a Palestinian and myself in as a person who resists, and then also focus on my studies and write this paper. And I really didn't know how to reconcile them. And so there was an active moment after October 7th where one of the first things I noticed, because I was working in a majority, if not entirely white workplace, is that I felt my whiteness disappear immediately, right? I am a pale-skinned person. People ask me if I'm Greek, if I'm, they don't, I have the option, and that's a privilege that I had to, really think about and reckon with, is I had the option for 2 years to assimilate to whiteness and to be acceptable and palatable to whiteness. And I didn't know that that's what I was doing. But when October 7th came, it woke me up and said, oh, no, girl, you are Palestinian. And I felt the visceral shift where I used to feel safe in the workplace. I'm so comfortable. I show up, I take off my jacket, I say hi to everybody. Good times, good vibes. But after that moment, I was like, oh, nope. There are people in this office who hate me. There are Zionists in this office. I am not safe, and I felt that very, very intimately. Sorry. So that woke me up. And I think I knew all my life, really, and maybe all of us Palestinians in the West, maybe many of us feel this to some extent, that there was always going to be a moment where we would have to rise and where we would have to reckon with, okay, we have these cushy Western lives, but there is a time limit on this life. Because, when you're Palestine, it almost feels like no flowers for J.K. Rowling, but it almost feels like being Harry Potter or something, where you're like, I'm like a chosen person. I have to like get up and talk and tell people about Palestine. You have to reckon with that. It's very real. So it changed my life. I became a therapist that I didn't expect myself to become. I didn't expect myself to be a therapist whose career was defined in any way by race or ethnicity. But it was handed to me, right? And I had to rise to that. So it really shook up everything. And now I'm kind of forgetting the question. Can you give me the question again?
It's a question about recommitting after October 7th and what it meant to you. And I think you're on board, so don't.
Okay. Yeah. I really had to just figure out how to be these two people. The people who felt separate is, I think, really, really the main thing. And in a strange way, I felt very fortunate because on a personal level, I'm coming from a life history where I'm gay and I grew up in the church. And that was a whole that was a whole decade of struggle in and of itself, of being told like you actually don't belong in this space and you're actually a disappointment to God, or all those things that queer people get told at church. And so for a long time, those felt like separate people. Of how do I hold faith and hold, queerness at the same time? Because you're not supposed to, it's not allowed. And so suddenly I was brought back to this moment of like, the world is telling me that I can't be these two things at once. The world is telling me that I can't be a proud, vocal, active Palestinian and also be a therapist. And so it changed. I had to reckon with that. How am I going to be both of these things? How am I going to be one integrated person? And so there's a lot that had to change. I went public on social media, and that was a massive change. Because, I've gotten comments historically from people, colleagues in the field who really don't get me, who are like, your clients shouldn't know this much about you. I'm like, I don't have that kind of privilege for my clients not to know something about me. That's not the world that I exist in. And also, who says that it's not therapeutic for my clients to see that I'm a whole person? So I had to really reckon with that and be like, you know what? I am going to be myself on the internet, and it's going to be terrifying. And sometimes I'm going to say they have bad takes that piss people off. And sometimes I'm going to be really vulnerable and tell people I'm heartbroken and rage at silent people. I'm going to do all kinds of things. And I'm actually just going to embrace that, and we're just going to see what happens. And if my clients are not comfortable anymore with me being their therapist, then they have agency and they can go. But you know what? They didn't. They didn't. And it really opened up a space where I was like, hey, what if more therapists decide to be themselves in public? Not for the sake of, I don't know, like exhibitionism or something, but just to say, hey, I'm real, I grieve, and my grieving is not clean. It's not ready to be made into like a 7-slide pro tips on grieving from your therapist. Like, no, I'm just going to give you something raw and real. And if somebody gets something out of that, that's great. And if they don't, then again, my clients have agency and they can go. That's okay. So there was a massive journey there about accepting everything that I am, like a big fruit salad, and just like seeing what comes of it. And I think what came out of it is like pretty good. Here we are. So
I just wanted to read out some of the comments that we had in the chat because
sure.
they were so beautiful. One of them said, it was beautiful kind of watching that transition happening for you via social media, of realizing there's no turning back. This is who you are in full, unapologetically. So know that you are inspiring people. I'm sure you know this already, but even right here with a small group that we have here.
Thank you so much.
And another comment that said there's something so special about letting yourself be your fullest version publicly and learning who actually values that, your clients and people who follow you and the therapists that you inspire, and who feels intimidated by it as well.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
That's okay.
That's okay. Yeah.
Let it happen. Radical acceptance.
Radical acceptance, deep acceptance, indeed. So I'm aware you've been talking for a long time, so take as long as you need, drink water, do whatever you need. We have one last pre-prepared question for you, and we might have time to take maybe one or two questions from the chat. So I'm inviting folks to put their questions in the chat, and we may or may not be able to get to it today, but if you have anything you want us to bring up, you're welcome to put that in the chat right now. As I asked Maria this last question, you mentioned a couple times today about the different identities that you hold, including being queer, being Christian as well, which is those two identities are often also used by Zionists to justify their violence against you or against those communities. Can you speak to this process and how you interrupt it, if you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I somehow, I hope that this lands, but in thinking about this, it kind of feels to me like, and my apologies to children, but it kind of feels to me like when children are talking about like how Santa Claus is going to come, but then you've got like the parents upstairs like budgeting for Christmas. You know, and this is how I feel about Zionist propaganda about me as a queer person. Of like they're sitting around talking about how Hamas is going to throw me off a roof. And it's like, okay, you guys can talk about all that. I am over here actually like fighting real battles. You know, like I'm actually here at Pride. You know, like Pride in Ottawa this summer was massive. We disrupted this like capitalistic pride parade because you know Capital Pride here in this city had originally committed to engaging with BDS and taking on BDS, and then they backtracked the following year. And so, you know, we as like queers for Palestine in the city were very pissed about this, and we rose up against it. And so, like, while somebody on the internet, like some Zionist on the internet, is talking about how Hamas is going to throw me off a roof, I am in the street, and I have a Zionist butch lesbian staring me down with so much hatred in her eyes. And we found out later that day that that another Zionist had been running around with a knife. And so while the propaganda machine is churning, and while somebody is theorizing about my existence as a queer Palestinian, I'm actually doing real things. I am busy. And so I think that this is a lot of people get triggered and upset by propaganda. And I agree. It is triggering and it's upsetting. And at the same time, I can sit here and battle with you and be like, no, they wouldn't throw me off. I don't like live my life according to battling somebody else's propaganda. I exist whether you like it or not. I exist no matter what conversations you're having about me. And the thing is, they're not having conversations about me anyway, right? It's like a caricature of a gay Palestinian that's being thrown off the roof, which has literally never happened, right? So my big thing about interrupting that is like I don't even think about interrupting it. I'm just not paying attention to them. I am living my life. And I think that we will find that with propaganda is very fragile. It feels very strong, but it's also very fragile. Because I'm coming from, and I'm sure other Palestinians will feel this, that like if we're talking like 5 years ago, when I was in my master's, I told somebody I was Palestinian and they looked at me like terrified and offended immediately. Oh, okay. It's like, what is going on? Are you okay? But now, right? Look how, and I'm not going to say easily because the price was paid by the people in Gaza and the people in the West Bank, right? But once people get to know us as Palestinians, the propaganda just falls apart. So I would say that like authenticity and living your real life and being a fully fleshed out human being as I strive to be is already enough. And existing is already enough. I don't go around thinking about their propaganda points and being like, okay, here's how I'm going to combat it. No, like I just exist, and your dialogue about my existence is just irrelevant to me. Um, so that's the queer piece. The Christian piece is interesting as well. I think that many Christian Palestinians or um, Christian Lebanese people, folks who are, Arab Christians, many of the ones I've connected to are almost like reluctant to talk about religion because I don't want to give this impression that I am like a deeply religious person. I used to be, but I also had my queerness to contend to. But the reason I speak about Christianity as a Palestinian is because Christianity is indigenous to Palestine. Like Jesus was born in Bethlehem, as we now have been reiterating for 3 Christmases in a row. So for me, I don't talk about it from a place of dogma or uh, even like a theological tradition. It's about reclaiming a spiritual tradition that belongs to my ancestors, first and foremost, before it was taken over by the empire and before it was made the religion of whiteness. Before all of that, Jesus was born to like my little community in Palestine, among my ancestors. And so that's why that reclaiming is really important to me. And also as a religious trauma, somebody who works with people in therapy, you know, um, to work through religious trauma. These things are not separate, right? The colonial hijacking of religion and the things that it teaches people, right? This like Christianity that is actually just secretly whiteness, right? Um, is harmful for people's mental health. And so speaking about that and correcting harmful ideology and reclaiming Christianity as a faith tradition that belongs to Palestine and to Bilad Hashem, which is, our region historically, is part of reclaiming and re-indigenizing um, this like massive piece of world mythology that has been weaponized and taking it back and being like, no, this belongs to my community and my ancestors. And let's have a new relationship with it because the one that we have been having is just a relationship with whiteness. So, yeah, my 2 cents.
Those are great 2 cents. It really speaks to the power of knowing your history and existing and authenticity as the biggest refutation of like pinkwashing propaganda or whitewashed Christianity, and knowing those narratives, where you come from and where things started getting warped by some of those other forces.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So we're getting an influx of questions in the chat, which is beautiful. We might have to cherry pick some of them. So
Okay.
I apologize in advance to everyone who maybe we won't get to your question or it might not be asked exactly the right way. So I apologize in advance. We did come across this one. I'm curious, Maria, if you have some thoughts on this from the live chat. The question was wondering about how to hold a client with care, but also accountability when something is said that is unethical. Like if a client casually says something offensive, and I wonder a bit about power dynamics and how that plays into the therapy space as well. I'm curious if you have to share.
What an interesting question. I would like to say, and maybe I'll reflect on this later and feel differently, but I would like to say that why should that be any different from like sitting with a client who is having, let's say a client's having like relationship problems and they're like complaining to you about their girlfriend or something, and you're sitting there and you're like, that's valid, but also look at what you're doing in this dynamic, right? And so we do already have experience as therapists with gently challenging clients to consider their role in the conflict that they are having and to consider the blind spots that they have. And if a client says something that is racist or sexist or whatever it is, that situation for them in their mind is also they are also not free because they are holding that belief. right? So if you're like living in a world where like immigrants are the problem, it's like, what's going on with you that you feel like, are you okay? You know, like what what are you running from in yourself that makes you feel like immigrants are the problem? Right? So I think it's also about a level of confidence for us to be like, they are not free when they believe these things. This is also harmful for them. Now, that being said, I do want to really emphasize that, like, if you as a practitioner are not feeling safe as a result of some discriminatory ways that your client, is showing up in session, like, know that you have like labor rights and you have the right to feel safe in your work environment. So it's also about making sure that you have done that check in with yourself to say, like, no, it's okay. I'm going to work with this person. And if you do choose to, go into it with confidence and go into it in the same way that you would disrupt anything that they're doing that is a blind spot for them. And know that I really think we already have the tools, right? So somebody's going to come back and say, well, I'm not racist. I was like, well, I didn't say that you were racist. I said that that thing that you said is racist, right? And that's not so far away from me saying, like, hey, are you listening to what your girlfriend's saying? And they might be like, oh, I'm listening to her. It's like, but do you listen to her when she says that? Maybe we can step more into our confidence and realize that, like, we have been socialized or trained as therapists to think that political things um, are somehow outside of our wheelhouse, but we really do already have the skill set. And I do believe that we can bring confidence into that and see it as just like any other thing that we might want to redirect our client about. And the second thing also, I made a very angry video about this, like probably 2 years ago, shortly after I was fired, because someone had asked me about, well, what about Zionists? What about if Zionists feel uncomfortable with me as a therapist? I'm like, well, why don't, first of all, I'm not working with Zionists as a Palestinian therapist. It's just not happening. But teach people empathy. This is part of our job as therapists, right? This is also something Irving Yalom said, is help people develop empathy, because when people lack empathy, they suffer for it, right? If we think about our clients who have, well, let's say, social anxiety, right? A lot of social anxiety has to do with you have assumptions about other people. These people are cooler than me, or these people are judging me. It's like, well, you're kind of dehumanizing those people, right? As you're saying that they're judging you, but you're also judging them, right? And so by helping people discover and learn empathy, you can we already do that in so much of what we do. It's just about allowing ourselves to stretch and bring that into conversations around being less oppressive people, more accepting people.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's a lot of realizing that a lot of us already have the training for this. The gentle challenging, the person isn't the problem is the problem, cultivating empathy. And it takes a level of confidence and it takes a level of tact and also takes being able to differentiate being uncomfortable with something that was said and actually feeling unsafe when the client is in the room. But thank you for coming up with that. Even we put you on the spot.
I'm ready for it. Hit me.
We are close on time, so we may not be able to take any more questions. I'm curious if it's okay at this point in time that I pass the baton along to the person who's going to do our conclusion for today. Franklin, would you like to take the baton?
Thanks, Taro. Firstly, I want to thank you, Maria, for being so generous with your time today. I know you were probably busy chatting and couldn't look at the chat, but it was just like full of love and appreciation for you the whole time. Your words inspired so many reflections and vulnerable sharing and good questions and people connecting in the chat over their own experiences. So thank you for doing that.
That makes me so happy. I hope that many awesome collaborations are formed.
We do too. What's one of the goals for this event is to let people connect with one another. And that's how Therapists for Palestine started, was people at an event realized, oh, we're thinking the same, just like you were saying, let's do something about it.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone who took time today to come to this. Thank you everyone watching the recording later. thanks everyone for sharing in the chat and for donating. So we raised over $2,400 today. The majority of that will be donated to Grassroots Gaza after compensating our lovely speaker and covering some small Eventbrite and Zoom fees. So again, Grassroots Gaza gets funds directly to mutual aid campaigns on the ground in Gaza and Egypt. And as we're seeing this week with the shameful betrayal of MSF, also called Doctors Without Borders, of their Palestinian employees, we cannot trust nonprofit industrial complex to stand on the side of justice. So initiatives like Grassroots Gaza are more important than ever to follow and support and uplift wherever we can. So I'd really encourage you to go to their Instagram page. They're at grassroots_Gaza. Also, look out for emails from us. We're going to be following up with you using the email you signed up for today to both send you a recording of this event, but also organizing resources that organizers with Therapists for Palestine have been putting together, specifically designed to support therapists, whether you're new to organizing or you're already organizing and you're looking for ways to learn more, find other comrades in the field, self-organize, and take strategic anti-colonial action together. This event was the first in a series of talks called Therapy is Political. In February, we're really excited to have Quill Christie Peters joining us. Quill is an Anishinaabe visual artist and educator. She recently published the book On Wholeness, Anishinaabe Pathways to Embodiment and Collective Liberation. In this book, she explores how colonialism disconnects us from ourselves and how reconnecting with the body can be an act of resistance and healing. You really don't want to miss that conversation, so keep an eye out for emails from us and on our Instagram page because we'll be announcing the exact dates and the registration details really soon. Lastly, if you want to support us with hosting or advertising this series of talks, we're always looking for folks with skills in design and PR, videography, community outreach, and more. Outside of these larger events, Therapists for Palestine really encourages local organizing within your communities and within your professional spaces. We have an active chapter of organizers in so-called Ontario, Canada right now. That's where many of the folks who organize this event today are based. And so if you're also there, we especially want to connect with you and see how we might work together. So I'm going to drop our email in the chat and we hope to hear from you. This brings us to the end of the event tonight. Thank you for staying with us and sharing so many of your questions and appreciation for Maria. We really look forward to staying connected with you all and spread the word about this series. We hope to see you next time.
Thank you all so much for joining us.